Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. Perryn Keys here, hanging out with Koki Riley, our LSU baseball beat writer. He has been there for almost all 56 of LSU's regular season games, but certainly the overwhelming – how many did you miss? Just the three, Koki? Is that right? 3 or 4?
Just 3, yeah.
Yeah,
just
3. 53 out of 56. That's a pretty damn good batting average, as you would expect an Advocate beat writer to have going there. He has finished out the regular season with the LSU baseball team, as have the Tigers, who finished 36-20, 13-17 in the SEC. According to D1 Baseball, their RPI ranking should be at number 30, and they will head out to Hoover to the SEC tournament, coming off of a huge weekend that I frankly did not think they could put together, and they certainly had not to this point. So they sweep Ole Miss at Alex Box Stadium this past weekend. And again, they will head off to the SEC tournament. They will play at 9:30 a.m. Tuesday against Georgia. So with that in mind, Koki, I hope you've got what's your caffeinated beverage of choice?
Not a coffee person, so I don't know. I'm not a huge caffeine person in general.
Oh, well, we'll fix that. Stick with us for a little longer, and we'll fix that, Koki. We'll have you shotgun and Red Bulls in no time. But anyhow, we are here, of course, obviously to discuss the Tigers. They're back in the fight now. They, as we said, they're 13-17, which is sort of that I don't want to call it bare minimum, but certainly that's the mark. If you finish 13-17 in conference play, historically, you've got yourself a pretty good shot of making it in. It's certainly not a given. We're going to have to see how these conference tournaments play out, and we'll get into that. But we'll start off, Koki, just by saying, hey, where do they stand? Where does LSU stand, and what does it look like they'll have to do when they get to Hoover?
Yeah, so in terms of where they stand in comparison to the rest of the country, this team should be in. This team deserves to be in. When you look at the other teams that are outside the SEC in comparison, if you compare their resume to a James Madison that won 2 out of 3, even won 2 out of 3 this weekend, to say even a team like UL or Xavier they beat earlier this season. Those teams are more firmly into the field, but I guess Cincinnati's another team that's kind of on the bubble. They're ahead of all those teams in RPI. They're ahead of virtually all those teams in RPI. They're just at quad 1 wins, quality wins. I mean, almost whatever you look at, they're ahead of a lot of these, if not most of these, pretty much all of these non-conference teams. UCF, I think Northeastern's the only team on the bubble that D1 Baseball and Baseball America listed that is a higher RPI than LSU right now after this weekend. So when you look at it from just the metric standpoint, you look at them and you're like, oh, they should be in comfortably. But the problem is the SEC has never put in 11 teams into the tournament. And right now, I'd say LSU has the 11th best resume to make the tournament out of the SEC, because that just kind of gives you an idea of how loaded and jam-packed the SEC is, especially in that middle class. And LSU is kind of the last team in the middle class right now. It was them or Ole Miss for that spot, and they won out in the spot. So if you just look at their resume and you compare it to the other non-conference teams, they should be in. But the problem is that the SEC has never put 11 teams into this tournament. And if you want to solidify your spot, winning a couple at games in the SEC tournament, not only will you probably, or potentially at least, jump 1 or 2 of those SEC teams, but you'll fortify your own metrics even further. So I think this week is definitely going to be important for them, pretty much no matter what. But at the same time, if they were to lose, you can make the argument that they can still definitely get in.
So one of the things we need to talk about here, and of course we can only get into it so much because clearly these conference tournaments, most of them haven't started yet. And with that in mind, we see this during March Madness all the time, right? You've got a couple of teams that are on the bubble that look like they've got a better than 50-50 chance to get in. But now all of a sudden, and I'm just going to make this up, but you'll understand where I'm going with this. Some 6th place team in the Missouri Valley Conference goes all the way through, wins the tournament championship, and now they've got an automatic bid. that then forces or potentially forces some other team that seemed like it would be a shoe-in to have to eat up an at-large bid, which then the ripple effects. Now, in all likelihood, you would have to see something like this out of, the MAC, the Missouri Valley, maybe 3 or 4 conference tournaments even, to sort of push LSU out toward the bubble. At least we think. And so, that's something we're going to have to take a look at. I know, Koki, you were looking at the Pac-12 for semi-selfish reasons. May happen, something that may happen there that you have to keep an eye on. But really, this is, that's always the case, and it could be the case coast to coast. The more favorites that win and thereby use up a conference championship slot, then the better off that LSU is in terms of having a little bit looser at-large field.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, in the Pac-12, there's really only 2 teams that look like they're going to make it into the tournament, and that's Arizona and Oregon State. But if someone else wins that conference tournament, then all of a sudden that's a bid stealer, right? And that can very easily happen given just the carnage of the nature of the Pac-12 conference, no matter what the sport is. Like, for example, Arizona State's won 15 of the last 18 games, and they've kind of become an offensive juggernaut lately. So what if they continue that? Right now, their metrics aren't good enough to get in as an at-large team or really even be a bubble team right now. But what if they won the conference tournament, right? And all of a sudden, you have to make a spot for them, right? So it's stuff like that you want to look for in smaller conferences than just the Pac-12, but just all these sort of conferences. And the Sun Belt's also a very interesting conference to look at, in the fact that they have 4 or 5 teams that are on the bubble and have an argument of getting in as an at-large team.
I was just looking at that.
Very strong conference.
Yeah, I was just looking at that. Probably not the best example, but like an Appalachian State, they've got a great overall record, but they're 73 in the RPI, 31-19 and 1 conference record. Probably not a team that gets in, but that's the team that's the type of team that is just good enough to make a charge, in a conference tournament.
Exactly.
And really start to screw stuff up. So that's something you have to take a look at. And as you mentioned, certainly all things being equal, and if we're in a vacuum here, which we're not, but if all things were equal and we want to take a look at some history here, there's some local history, one way or the other, that you can look at in terms of past LSU teams. Obviously, you spoke to somebody who would have been in the know because he lived and died at these sorts of scenarios in which he found his LSU teams in 2011 and then 2021. Am I mistaken? That's the correct years, right?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us what you learned from one Paul Mainieri in terms of just sort of rehashing some similar fates that LSU found themselves in.
Yeah, for a story that's coming out on Monday morning, I got the privilege to talk with Paul Mainieri right after LSU beat Ole Miss to clinch that series sweep, and a lot of it we talked about, and that 2011 team, that 2021 team also had a 13-17 record in conference play. The 2011 team had the same exact overall record too as this LSU team, but the 2011 team didn't get in, and a lot of it was at least in his opinion. I want to be clear about that. In his opinion, was because the committee was predetermined not to let an SEC team, an extra SEC team, and an extra SEC team into the field, that they didn't necessarily, had to put in, I guess.
It must be nice to be retired if you're Paul Mainieri, because you can just sort of speak your mind and throw out these, whether it's a tinfoil hat theory or not. He's no longer encumbered by having to be politically correct or politically strategic about what he's saying. Just came out and said, "Yeah, these guys had it out for us because we were an SEC juggernaut."
Yeah, but the thing is, one of the things that hurt that team was because it didn't make the SEC tournament. The SEC tournament at the time only had 8 teams, only 8 teams could get in, and they were the 9th or 10th team. And he even mentioned Ole Miss. Like, Ole Miss probably should have had an at-large bid that year, and they didn't get it because the committee could just say, "Well, you didn't make your conference tournament, so how are we going to put you in the NCAA tournament?" And one of the themes of what we talked about was that no matter what the metrics are and how strong they look on the surface, there's nothing that's guaranteed when you're in the bubble. Like, if you slip up, say LSU loses against Georgia this week, it's the committee could say that, oh, well, you lost your first round tournament game. The only real team that you beat in conference play for a series was Texas A&M 2 out of 3. The other two you beat, and the other 3 teams you beat aren't going to make the tournament anyway. So how good are you really? So, like, for example, right? Like, you can twist and turn resumes based on what you can use the numbers to your advantage, right?
That's correct.
And the committee can cherry pick based on what they want to decide. And I'm not saying that's what they're going to do. I'm not saying that's what they have been doing the last year or two. But
we
it
have
was
seen
something
that.
that we have to keep in mind. Yeah.
We have seen that baseball committees, the college football playoff committee, even the NCAA basketball, the tournament selection committee. A lot of times, fair or not, right or wrong, good or bad, up or down, a lot of times they will decide we have decided that we are going to use the eyeball test with this team, and then, in my opinion, anyway, just sort of retrofit the argument to justify which team it's selected. So it's very much an art, and or it's either an art, not a science, or a little bit of,
Science and
well,
not
I
art.
like. Yes. Well, it's you know what? It's kind of both, though, isn't it? And plus,
Or it's both. Yeah.
that's and there's a little bit of political maneuvering, even possibly. So there's at least in Palmineri's eyes, there certainly was in one of these years. So, well, look, long story short, this none of this is probably on the table if LSU only wins 2 out of 3 against Ole Miss. They really needed a sweep to even put themselves in a decent position. We've been talking for weeks now about how we thought 13 and 17, was kind of the make or break number for conference record for LSU to, or really for that matter, any SEC team to sort of have a decent case to make. And certainly, look, they did not sweep a conference opponent all season, all the way until the very end. They needed 3 wins. I had just sort of assumed that even if everything went right, they might only wind up with 2 out of 3, just because that's sort of the way this season has gone for LSU. But they took care of business in more ways than one, and they really did it. And it wasn't just starting pitching. It wasn't just the bullpen. It wasn't just Tommy White. It was all these things sort of coming together at all the right time, which we'll get into a little bit of detail in a minute here. But Koki, just sort of your general assessment of the weekend that was.
Yeah, it was, I think, top to bottom, arguably their best played weekend of the year. I think the Houston weekend is the other one that would come to mind. That Houston weekend has become bigger and bigger as the season has gone along, because UL looks like they're going to make the tournament. Looks like they're one of the top two or three teams in the Sun Belt Conference, which we talked about earlier. And then there's Texas, which has been on an absolute roll in the Big 12 the last few weeks, and looks like they're going to make the tournament as well. LSU's ahead of both those teams in RPI and KPI, by the way. Actually, Texas might be slightly ahead in KPI, but you understand what I'm getting at here. They're
right there with these other teams that have done well.
Yeah. And just to get back to this Ole Miss series, Ole Miss did not look impressive at all this weekend. This was an incredibly disappointing weekend for them. They just had they won 2 games. They're in the spot that LSU is in right now. But it's not a terrible opponent. It's getting these wins really helps their RPI standing, really helps their standing just probably within the committee to sweep a team that was considered to be at least on the bubble heading into this weekend. And they did it with great pitching. Like that's the number one thing that like just sort of jumps out to you this weekend. The offense was just okay, I thought, overall. They played very well on Saturday offensively, but I thought they missed a lot of opportunities in that Friday game, and then Thursday they were solid. They were okay, good enough to win. And that's how this team kind of wins games. They're good enough to win offensively, and then the pitching is lights out, or at least close to it. And that pitching staff that we've been talking about for the entire year really lived up to its promise for the entire weekend, for really the first time since probably Houston, I'd say.
So let's get into a little bit more of that. We said, I mean, all the way back in February, Koki, right? And this was not just us, obviously. This was probably Jay Johnson himself, in addition to everybody who pays attention to college baseball, generally speaking. The strength of this team, the LSU baseball team, was supposed to be its pitching staff, starting with the weekend rotation. Thatcher heard that experiment obviously did not work for whatever reason. We can get into that later. But listen, long and short of it is that Gage Jump was supposed to be a great weekend pitcher. Luke Holman was supposed to be a great weekend pitcher, and you can make a pretty strong argument. All of a sudden, you look up and this is one of the better duos for a weekend rotation in the SEC.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And among SEC pitchers who have thrown at least 50 innings in SEC play, uh, Holman and Jump have the second lowest. Are one of only two combos to have an ERA under 5, under 4.6 actually. And the only other combo is Mississippi State's Cal Steven and Uriel Ciente. That sort of gives you an idea of the strength of the 1-2 punch that they have. Like even Arkansas's pitching, which is, they have an incredible bullpen, but they don't have quite the 1-2 punch at the top of the starting rotation that a team that even LSU has. So I mean, I gotta say, like they've been as advertised this season, and I mean, Luke Holman, I think he had some of his best command of the year in his start, and with Gage Jump, he felt like he had a really good feel for his fastball and in his start. So, yeah, I mean, everything was working for Holman, and with the way Gage Jump is pitching, and you can never tell if Gage is pitching well or not based on his emotions because he's so tough on himself. But
Right.
he was pretty solid as well, and I gotta say, like when you have those two guys to anchor the top of your staff, it definitely helps. And I mean, as good as Ty Floyd was at the end of last season, he wasn't quite as consistent as these two guys have been in SEC play in particular, at least during the regular season. So, I mean, last year they had the fireball. I mean, it's hard to have more of an advantage than having Paul Skeens in your rotation, but just kind of having this 1-2 combo at the top just really helps everything else with your bullpen and whatnot. So it should be interesting.
So let's talk about that bullpen. For virtually the entire season, it was Griffin Herring, and I don't mean to be too harsh, but it was Griffin Herring who you knew you could depend on, and Pot Luck, or at least for much of it. Maybe one reliever would have a good strong series of appearances, but then take a dive. And similar with maybe there was another reliever, and we're not going to name names. We don't need to, but there's another reliever who has the stuff, but it's just not happening for him. The command's not there, leaving it over the plate, pitching a little too fat, or whatever it is. Well, no timelier a weekend than to come on strong right before or right when you need to. Would have been nice for LSU had it happened a little bit earlier, but the bullpen really was, as you said, Koki, lights out all weekend. If I'm not mistaken, it's 13 1/3 or 13 2/3, and an ERA right around 2. 13 1/3 and an ERA right around 2. If you get that for 3 consecutive days, that's certainly something that maybe you didn't see for much of the season out of this bullpen. And what a great way to go into an SEC tournament, which is always, if you're going to last even just a couple of days, it's always going to be taxing on a bullpen. And we know about the postseason after that, regionals and so on. So, how about that bullpen coming along at the right time, or at least coming along on a weekend when it absolutely had to?
Yeah, and I think a part of this is obviously the fact that they're in a very tight race right now, and they need to push these guys a little bit further. Like Christian Little, for example, he threw on Thursday, he threw on Friday, and he was warming up to come into the game on Saturday if things got a little bit hairy at the end. Gavin Guidry threw twice in the series. Nate Ackenhausen threw twice in the series. Griffin Herring threw twice in the series. So those are kind of the core four right now, I'd say, out of the bullpen for them. And like Nate Ackenhausen is also kind of like almost like a quasi starter as well, because they'll bring him in early in these third games. And the fifth guy, if I had to pick one right now, is probably Fidel Ulloa.
Hmm.
He's had two pretty strong weekends. If you just look at his ERA, you can tell that the fact that he hasn't had that many, bad performances this season in general, even if he hasn't pitched a ton in SEC play. So I think if you can get solid performances out of those five guys, that's going to help a lot. And pretty much all of them can go at least 2 innings, if not more. Like Gavin Guidry had the 4 inning outing against Northwestern State, which was very promising. It showed he can go to, 40, 50 pitches in an outing if they need him to. And like you mentioned Thatcher Hurd earlier, Thatcher Hurd actually had a pretty solid outing on Saturday.
He did.
It was a little
He did.
surprising, but he got him through, I think, at least the end of the seventh and through the eighth. So that was pretty interesting. And I mean, they're still trying to find that fifth, like that sixth or seventh guy, but you might be sort of picking nits a little bit at that point with the bullpen. But either way, like it's starting to finally round into some sort of shape that we somewhat thought would be at the very beginning of the season, at least.
And not for nothing, I know we've been over this before, but a nice moment for Thatcher Hurd, who certainly had his share of nice moments last season. LSU, instrumental. One of those so many pitchers that were instrumental in the Tigers' trip to Omaha and through Omaha last season. But a nice moment for him to sort of have, to finish up this regular season in Alec Box. But also, as we mentioned before, how nice a kind of a mini story is it that Christian Little, whose tenure at LSU, frankly, has not gone the way certainly LSU fans, but he himself probably would have guessed for it to happen. And all of a sudden he comes up late in this season as one of the more dependent, the big clutch performance against Texas A&M this weekend as well. As you said, two appearances and warming up for a third had he been needed. So what a nice little moment that is for Christian Little, and also Thatcher Hurd as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with Thatcher, he just seemed like he was locating his stuff a little bit better. And again, that curveball and slider are so good. If you could just, not give up really hittable fastballs, then he's just a tough guy to hit. And then with Christian Little, it's, that changeup's nasty. He's got a really good fastball and get up to 96, 97, even 98 miles an hour. And, when those guys are locating their pitches, that's when they're really tough to hit. And Christian's been doing that a lot lately. And that's really been a major key to his success, that combined with a couple tweaks they've made to his pitch mix and whatnot. And this guy's always been talented, right? I mean, he started in the College World Series final as a 17-year-old
for
at Vanderbilt. So yeah, so it's I do think that like the way he's pitched lately is definitely helped his MLB stock as well, I think, because scouts have always known this guy's talented. It's just a matter of putting it together. And I mean, especially in that A&M appearance he had, where he went 3 or 4 innings and pretty much shut down one of the best lineups in the country. And I gotta say, it was like that was really, maybe that won't be the peak of a season, but it felt like the peak of a season at the time. And it's hard to get much higher than that as a reliever.
Yeah. Certainly the highest point for my money, the highest point of his tenure so far at LSU. Well, speaking of helping his stock out, not that he needed much help to begin with, but it's harder to do much better than going 8 for 13, 3 homers, 7 RBIs, 6 extra base hits in one weekend, including a grand slam to sort of finish off the series. One Mr. Tommy Tanks has shown up at the right time. LSU is always going to need a lot of production out of him, and what better time, speaking of an offense that needs every bit of help it can get. So how about number 47 coming through in the clutch?
Yeah, I mean, he is absolutely destroying the ball, and I think it was Hayden Travinsky who talked about this after Saturday's game, that he's not missing the pitches he needs to drive. And sometimes you saw that during the year when he was struggling, maybe, or maybe when he was just, good, but not amazing as the way he's playing right now. And he would just, foul off the fastball right down the middle, for example, right? Early in the count, or maybe not hit it as sharply as he would like. But now he's doing that. He's driving every mistake pitch and turning it into a double, turning it into a home run. And And his recent production has really sort of risen his standing within the SEC, the SEC leaders. Like, for example, he has more conference home runs than Jack Caglione this year.
Not
which
bad.
is kind of crazy, right?
Not bad.
Yeah.
I don't think he's catching Condon. I'll go out on that limb.
No, but he's
had a great year. Yes.
Yeah, he's not that far. I mean, Charlie Condon hit 19 home runs in conference play. Tommy White hit 16. So he wasn't even that far from him. So in terms of home runs this year, he was as good as advertised, I thought. And you're sort of getting more of that consistent production from the doubles, even a triple that he hit, which is the first one he said he'd hit since he was like 9 or 10 years old. So it was just very.
He's never struck anybody for. He's never been mistaken for anybody who might leg one out on his way to third. I would say you hit a missile into the gap. Go ahead.
Yeah. He said he wasn't that gassed after he. Surprisingly, he wasn't as gassed as he thought he would be after he got the third base. But he said maybe the Tommy from last year would have been. A little bit more tired after that. So he was in such a jubilant mood this whole weekend, and it might have even kind of radiated across the rest of the team. Like they were just playing loose, they were playing fun, and you could just really sense that energy within the entire team. Maybe with the pitchers felt very locked in this week, but with the offense, there was sort of a joy that they had when things were going well, that we just really haven't seen a lot of this year. It's been mostly, frustration or just pure disappointment, like after the Alabama weekend, where they don't do everything right, obviously on the field, but in terms of their process, in terms of their focus, in terms of like trying to control as many controllables as possible. Jay Johnson was really impressed by that effort. But you still end up coming up short, right? And just that pure disappointment. And you just didn't feel that at all this week. And this weekend just felt free and easy and felt a lot like last year, if I'm being honest.
Which is good because obviously you don't want a team that's got so much to play for uptight if you can help it. So long as they are, you can play loose and not focused, but that's not what this was. It was loose and not fearful. It was loose and focused and not fearful of what might happen if something goes wrong, which really, now that I think about it, is and this sort of segues into the next topic, is pretty important given how the previous weekend at Alabama played out. And what I mean by that is, you mentioned Alex Milazzo and the great work. First and foremost, Alex Milazzo, great defensive catcher. The more and more I think about it, but you probably make a pretty solid argument that I don't know that anybody would really fight you on as the best defensive player in general for LSU. The thing that happens. Oh yeah, I see you rolling your eyes there. Who else would you?
No, I was trying to think. Yeah. I was just trying to think. Paxton Kling's been fantastic defensively in center field. I don't really have any. He's kind of flawless out there. If I'm being honest, he's just so good defensively in center. And if I was Jay Johnson, I would probably play him more out there just because he just gives you so much
outfield defense.
Key defensive. Yeah. And then Stephen Milam has been fantastic at second base this year. I mean, that kid is so fun to watch. Just how he's just so smooth out there. And he made a fantastic play in the Saturday game where I think it was a one hopper to Jared Jones that he couldn't quite handle. It was a really hard hit ball. It deflects off his glove. It pops up in the air. Milam grabs it in midair and tosses it to first base. And Uyo did a really good job of covering the bag. And he did it all kind of in one motion. And it was just a very, very impressive play. And but in terms of like pure value, though, like what Milano's doing behind the plate is obviously more valuable than what happens in center field and second base. Like he's catching every single ball. He's keeping the pitchers in check, right? He's blocking everything. So like that's obviously there's more value into what Milazzo's been doing, and he has taken the starting catcher role, and he has run away with it. And I don't think he was the guy to start the season. It was Brady Neal, and just like it was last year, and that honestly didn't surprise me because Jay Johnson has a lot of belief in Brady Neal, he's basically admitted it himself in that he said in the past a few times that I'm harder than Brady Neal than I am with maybe some of the other guys because of how much I believe in him. But with the way that, but on the flip side, but with the way that like Alex Milazzo has played, he can't take him out of the lineup. He just can't.
The one thing I was going to go back to was that Alabama series. Alex Milazzo known for excellent defense, and the one time just that whole game, and you know which game I'm talking about. I wish I could remember which day it was, but I mean you had Alabama dead to rights. It was almost not possible to lose that game. Okay, so it was the Friday game because that's how you started off the series, and you're thinking, gee whiz, we put ourselves behind the 8 ball. But to have him, I mean, how many times does Alex Milazzo field a tapper out there, between the mound and the plate and throw wide of the bag at first base? I mean, what the likelihood of that in and of itself is minuscule. And then he comes right back out. There's no question that he's going to stay in the lineup. He comes right back out and has as solid a weekend behind the plate as you could ever hope to have a catcher have against Ole Miss. So that, these are nice things to see in terms of bounce backs. And frankly, part of the reason why I didn't think that LSU was probably going to sweep Ole Miss as they needed to, because it's just these sort of weird things that would happen all season, right? They're in position to sweep, or even if they're not, even if they're in position to take 2 out of 3 and they only take 1. Well, they get a bunch of guys on, but they can't get them home, or they have, they don't get the timely 2-out hit, or something weird happens where you have your best reliever on the mound and Griffin Herring, and he doesn't, he can't quite get the job done. And all of a sudden your best, you put the ball, if the ball is going to be in play, you figure, well, the one guy I'd like to have his hands on the ball to make a play in terms of a defensive prowess standpoint, it would be Alex Milazzo, and he throws wide of the bag. I mean, just these crazy things that keep on happening to LSU that you really can't explain. You mentioned Paxton Kling, starting off cold, or certainly cool, lukewarm, however you want to put it in SEC play. And Mac Bingham, hitting, I don't remember what he hit last year at Arizona, but certainly not anywhere near what his average, he's not anywhere near what his average was last year. So just all these sorts of things that keep on piling up on a baseball team. And you figure maybe even if they're really good and they play really well, if it's just for whatever reason, it's just not happening this year. But they did it. They got it done this weekend as they needed to.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my biggest worries is that they just haven't had enough pitching to sweep a weekend.
Yep.
And I understand why they do the whole Johnny Holstaff thing on the Saturdays / Sunday games, because they have to. They don't really have anyone reliable enough to go 5 or 6 innings in that third game of a series. And that combined with the lack of bullpen depth that they've shown for really the entire season. And add in the fact that the offense just isn't really taking advantage of day 3 pitching. That's how you've gotten all these sort of disasters. That's how you've been run ruled in 4 of those games. That's how, you came into that debt. There's a reason why they were 1-8 heading into this Saturday in game 3s. And then the offense actually did what they needed to do. They scored 9 runs. They actually took advantage of that day 3 pitching. And then pitching wise, the Johnny Holstaff approach worked. And the Johnny Holstaff approach, it's been kind of working a little bit better the last couple of weeks. I mean, the Alabama series, they only gave 4 runs in that game. That's a good offensive team in a major hitter's park. And then they only give up 3 against Ole Miss this week. So it kind of shows you the at least the slight improvement of the depth when it comes to the bullpen.
They have right.
Yes, go ahead. And that depth has to be there, because you're about to go in the SEC tournament. You're going to play a lot of games in not a lot of days, right? And you're going to need as many guys as you possibly. You need as many guys as possible to throw well, and you're going to have to extend guys. And you saw it last year, and you've seen it even earlier this season because of the position they're in. But I guess if that's the only concern heading into, even if they make a regional with this team, it's the fact that they've had to start the clock earlier with a lot of this stuff in terms of pushing guys and having them throw multiple times in the same weekend and all that sort of stuff. And that was sort of a problem they had with the 2022 team, because they didn't have the starting pitching ever for really the entire season. So had to push the bullpen for not just the end of the year, but the entire year. But so the fact that they have 2 starters is really going to help them. But they need this offense to be a little bit more consistent in order to sort of combat maybe some of the fatigue that a guy like Griffin Herring or a guy like Nate Ackenhausen might feel if they get into a regional, once they get into day 3, day 4 of the SEC tournament, if they get there, stuff like that. Like that's going to be something I'm going to at least monitor, right? So it's this team has the talent to do something special this season still. As long as the committee obliges and they win a game or 2 here in the SEC tournament, even if they lose the first game, I think they have a chance, depending on, again, like what's going to determine their fate. Even if they only win a game or don't win any game, if they only win a game or don't win any games in the SEC tournament, is how many teams how many SEC teams the committee's willing to put in. If they're willing to put in 11, this team's in.
Yep.
And they won't need the SEC tournament to get in. But if they're not, you got to win at least 2 games. So it's, I think you probably need to win 2 games because they're 11th of 11 right now. And there's not really an argument to put them ahead of Vanderbilt or Florida or even South Carolina. I guess they're the closest since they haven't played them, or Alabama. So, and if you think about it, like kind of the crushing thing with this season is that they just win that Vanderbilt game, and if they win that Florida game and they win that Alabama game, they might not need the SEC tournament.
How many? Yeah,
if they wins then.
If they sweep Missouri instead of leaving one there, if they hold on against Alabama, how big would that game have been? How big would that win have been? Would it look now?
They sweep Auburn,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's all those games that missing your opportunity to sweep Missouri, missing your opportunity to sweep a pretty bad Auburn team, and missing that. If you replay that Friday game at Alabama 20 times, you probably win 19 out of those, and as the scenarios play out exactly as they did all the way to the 9th inning, you probably win that game 19 times out of 20, but it just didn't happen for them. So now here they are. So speaking of SEC tournament, 9:30 a.m. Tuesday, we're going to get you some Red Bull. We're going to get you onto that because you definitely need to be hooked on it like I am. LSU versus Georgia. Well, what's got to happen? We all know about Charlie Condon, of course. I think the casual fan is well educated on him. But why has Georgia had such a great year? And what is LSU? Whom do you expect to see in the lineup? What does LSU have to do? All those things.
Yeah, Georgia matches the ball. They're a really good offensive team. And Wes Johnson hasn't had a lot of talent to work with the pitching staff, but he's had the sort of Johnny whole staff it together for the entire season just so they can, win enough games. I mean, they're at 17 wins in SEC play. They've had a really good season. But you kind of see the cracks in their lack of pitching depth with that last Florida game where they lost 19-11. They gave up 19 runs in that last game. And if they beat Georgia in that game, if they just beat Florida in that game, Florida is kind of dead because Florida would have had to go to the SEC, the semifinals of the SEC tournament just to be eligible to be in the tournament because again, they were on the borderline. If you're not over 500, you can't get in. And they would have been at 500. So either way, like it's that losing that series was pretty big for Florida's hopes. But I think with Georgia, I mean, they have the best player in the country in Charlie Condon. I don't think there's any debate in that. I think he's going to be the number 1 overall pick. At least he deserves to be the number 1 overall pick in the Major League Baseball draft. Again, they mash the ball. The pitching depth kind of lacks there. It'll be interesting to see how LSU can not expose Wes Johnson at all, but like if Jay Johnson has any tricks up his sleeves to combat a Wes Johnson staff in terms of just strategy, right? Like, and I think that will help LSU more than Georgia because like Wes Johnson knows the hitting profiles of a chunk of LSU's hitters, but he doesn't know Mac Bingham or Ashton Larson or some of these other guys, right? Because LSU has a bunch of new guys in that starting lineup. So it's going to be really interesting. In terms of like who starts for LSU and whatnot, I think Gage Jump has a legitimate shot of starting on Tuesday. And I think they need this game. And despite the fact that, what weirdly helped them was the rain delay on Thursday. So after the 6th inning, there was a rain delay, and they were planning on pitching Jump in the 7th inning, but it happened during the 6th, so he had to come out after 83 pitches. And the fact that he was only 83 makes you think that, okay, he gets 4 or 5 days of rest heading
4
into
days
the
rest.
Tuesday game. 4 days rest, and he had less pitches in that Thursday game. So I've asked Jay Johnson about this at least once, maybe twice, and he hasn't ruled it out at all. And I just think it's possible. And even though Jay was, and this, we probably should talk about this earlier, but Jay was very, very confident in this team's chances to make the tournament, to the point where he said that they're one of the 10 to 15 best teams in the country without question. And this isn't even a debate. Their tournament chances, why are we even debating this, basically, and making a very strong case, sending a very strong message to the committee, basically. And even though I think at least most of him believes what he said, I also think he thinks this game is critical for their chances.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
They really want to solidify themselves. And yeah,
even if he really, I'm sorry, but even if he really, truly, genuinely believes they've done enough and they're going to make the case, as a coach, you have to coach like, well, we can't leave it to chance. We can't. Yes. We can't leave. We have to do as much as we possibly can to leave as little level of doubt in the selection committee's minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at, Georgia's 6th in RPI right now. So it's not just a general resume booster, and it keeps you alive in the SEC tournament.
It's a big booster.
It's a major booster, right? And you need those extra major wins against some of those top teams. And if they play Kentucky next and they beat Kentucky, then I think
that's more than enough.
In RPI.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's more than enough.
You add those RPI wins, maybe you jump 1 or 2 SEC teams in terms of RPI, say, because one of Vanderbilt or Florida is going to lose, for example, right? So that will help you immensely. So that's why I think this game is big for them. Even if there's a chance that it doesn't matter that much, but you don't know, because we don't know what the committee's thinking. If the committee is thinking that these 11 SEC teams, clearly they're good enough to all be in, we're just going to put them all in almost no matter what happens in the SEC tournament, then all right, then rest Jump. If you knew that going in, then you wouldn't pitch Jump in this game, right? But they don't know that. So you have to play it safe. And we have a story. Well, as we talked about Paul Maneri, we had the 2011 team that didn't get that chance and felt like they were in, and then they didn't get in. And then we also have the 2021 team that lost that first game in the SEC tournament to Georgia, funnily enough, and still got in. So it's almost more of a coin flip than it is a 70-30 or 80-20 proposition.
That's right.
When you just look at the numbers and you just look at how they compare to these other non-conference teams. So they should treat this as more of a 50-50 proposition, I think.
The 2021 team not only got in, not only snuck in, they went to Eugene, Oregon, and won the regional there and moved on to the Super Regionals. Ran out of steam against Tennessee, but if you're headed to the Super Regionals, well, I think every LSU baseball fan who's out there right now would take that gamble that you could wind up in the Super Regionals with a chance to go to Omaha. We're getting way ahead of ourselves, but certainly that's the best. That's certainly the best case scenario that you could hope for as LSU goes into the SEC tournament. Koki will be there. He will be en route later Monday to head to pull into Hoover. I can't wait to go get a Cinnabon from the mall nearby and have a good old time in Hoover, Alabama for what may or may not be a long stay there for the rest of the week. So we will see. But until then, obviously, please stick with the Advocate. We have always been, of course, the #1 destination for LSU sports. If you haven't joined the party and haven't joined us, you should. You can only get Koki's great stuff and Scott Rabelais and Wilson Alexander and Sheldon Mickles, all those guys. You can get their great work at theadvocate.com. Please subscribe. to do that, you go to
Reed
the
Darcy
Advocate.
too. I just want to make
Reed
sure
Darcy, of course,
he
young
gets
Reed
mentioned.
Darcy,
Yeah.
who may have an interesting piece of news here coming with the women's basketball team. I'll sort of tease that out. But of course, these fine gentlemen are working hard for you. Nobody covers LSU like they do. So please subscribe. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. And as we said, we've got news all over, not just with the LSU baseball team. Even here deep into May, there should be some more news coming if it hasn't already hit you by now. So we'll be on the lookout for that. And if you have signed up for the LSU newsletter, well, there's a real good chance you get breaking news, that type of breaking news, sent to your inbox already. And you certainly get all the latest headlines sent to your inbox every day with the LSU newsletter. It's a daily newsletter, and Rab handles that 3 times a week personally. So please support your local journalist and sign up for the LSU newsletter at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider. We are typically live. We are live on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on that YouTube channel, you should be able to find it. You should be able to subscribe to that channel. And that way you'll never miss an episode and you can catch us live. And if you don't catch us live on Monday and Thursday, you can always catch us sometime after the fact and catch up. And of course, if you don't want to find us on YouTube or Facebook, you can always find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. Please just search for LSU Sports Insider. And if you do that via Apple, you can leave a 5-star review. Please do. That'll help us find more LSU fans, and it'll help more LSU fans find us. Koki, it's been quite a journey. It doesn't seem, well, I don't want to speak for you, but it doesn't seem like February was that long ago. But, we're 56 games past now. And so we're getting down to crunch time. We'll see what LSU has in store, if they can pull a couple of more magic LSU baseball magic out of the proverbial hat, and see how far they can go. It's crunch time now. The weather's warm. The crawfish is out. The ball is flying a little bit farther in these warm parks, although, of course, we know Hoover is pretty spacious. So we will see how that plays either to LSU's advantage or disadvantage. So, but anyway, with that in mind, Koki, it's been a pleasure. We appreciate you jumping on what's going to be a very busy week. For Koki Riley, I'm Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.